Made in heaven!
Father Enrico Pucci's stand made in heaven does not have infinite speed. In JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, there are many stands and stand abilities people would describe as being broken. This is especially the case with main villains. For instance, you have Dio's stand The World, which can stop time, Diavolo's stand King Crimson, which can both see the future and erase time, and Kira's stand Killer Queen, which can rewind time. Following this trend, Part 6's main villain, Enrico Pucci, possesses a stand that evolves into Made in Heaven, the first and only stand that has ever achieved heaven. Just like the other central villain stands, its ability relates to the manipulation of time, allowing it to universally accelerate time except for those that are living. This makes it seem as if the world around you is immensely accelerated while you move at normal speed. For instance, clouds pass by you faster, the earth rotates faster, things fall in an instant, blood dries up in mere seconds, things freeze instantaneously, cars move around at supersonic speeds, etc. At one point, one of the characters, Jotaro Kujo, calculates that time is moving 30 times faster than normal. As a stand's user, Pucci can move in accelerated time, which translates to his speed massively increasing, allowing him to easily outperform Star Platinum, which is considered to be one of the fastest and most powerful stands in the entire series. Now that's good and all, but what is this about Pucci having infinite speed? Well, it is made apparent to the main cast that time isn't accelerated at a stagnant pace. Rather, time is continuously accelerating and accelerating to the point it is flying by faster and faster. It accelerates to such a point that the entire universe is driven to its end, with a new, nigh-identical universe being born through the death of the prior in a cycle that is virtually indistinguishable from the Big Bounce hypothesis. In the show's explanation of the universal reset, it is stated that after the end of the war, Pucci accelerates time to infinity. After this, the universe ends and we arrive at the singularity point, i.e. the intersection point between the end of the old universe and the beginning of the new one. It is said that Pucci then begins slowing down his time acceleration before the new world and the new history begins. So, if Pucci accelerated time to infinity, then surely he would have infinite speed by virtue of moving in accelerated time. Supporting this is that in Made in Heaven's stand sheet, its speed is said to be infinite. With all of that being laid out, I must seem crazy, right? What possible reason could I have for saying that Made in Heaven does not possess infinite speed when its speed is literally said to be infinite? Well, it all comes down to what infinity is and how it is applied. You see, infinity itself is a very strange concept to logically assess. Like, I'm pretty sure we all get the general idea of endlessness, but what does that actually mean? While it may not seem like it, the discussion surrounding infinity and how it works is actually extremely extensive. It is so extensive in fact that I plan to make a whole video dedicated to it. But for the purposes of this video, I'll go over it in a very simplified manner. Okay, so to illustrate the problem I have, we first have to find a very strict definition of the term infinity. Infinity is a noun that describes the state or quality of being infinite. Infinite is an adjective used to signify a lack of end, limit, or size. It is another way of saying non-finite or something which is not finite. Finite means something that has a limited size or extent. If we accept the aforementioned as true, it follows that the widely held belief that there are so-called levels of infinity or infinite speed does not hold up. For something to be infinite, it has to have no end. And if you say that one infinite something is lesser than another infinite something, you'd be contradicting yourself. To say something is lesser is to imply it is measurable or gaugeable, as you cannot compare the magnitudes of two things whose extent you are ignorant of, much less things that are supposed to have no end. Based on this, there is no such thing as a lesser or greater infinity, as those words in themselves imply and necessitate a quantifiable size of the something that is being discussed. If two things have no end, then it is impossible to say that one is lesser or greater than the other. By definition, it is intrinsic that infinity is greater in size or extent to all things and is lesser to no idea. With infinity being defined, we can now ask the question, can you arrive at infinity? The answer to this question is no. At least not in the manner Pucci achieved it. You see, Pucci accelerated time, and the rate at which time is accelerated would increase as time progressed. With this, we can establish that Pucci accelerates time relative to normal time at a finite rate, and this rate increases at a finite rate. With this, it would be impossible to reach infinity in any amount of time, as you cannot use that which is finite to arrive at that which is infinite. All that would happen is that Pucci would continuously accelerate time, and the rate at which time would accelerate relative to normal time would just continuously increase and increase and increase. However, it would never be infinite, as the rate of growth is demonstrably finite. Even if the rate of growth increases, regardless of how fast it increases, it will still yield a finite unit. Another misconception about infinity in the way I'm defining it is that it is not a number or extent. It is the absence of end. It is the state of endlessness. So to say you went from finite to infinite via growth would be to treat that which is infinite as an end or limit to something that is achievable or can be achieved. In reality, the aforementioned description of made in heaven would lead us to the fact that it is approximating infinity. I don't know if you've ever had math classes about limits and heard the term x is approximating to 5 or some other value. When this is said, it means that x is the closest value to 5, which is not 5. So it is 5.00000 and so on. To illustrate it another way, you cannot arrive at 0 from 1 via division. Try it out. Regardless of what value you use to divide 1 by or how many times you divide it, you will just arrive at another value that is less than 1 but not 0. There is a concept in mathematics called an infinitesimal, which is the closest value to 0 that is not 0. I believe it takes inspiration from the idea of infinity. So, if we say infinity is analogous to 0, finiteness is everything in between, and infinitesimal is the closest value to 0 that is not 0, what would be the closest value to infinity, which is not infinity? Some may say it is a transfinite number, which, by definition, is the closest thing to infinity. But, again, this would be treating infinity as a number, measurement, or extent, as opposed to what it actually is, which is the state of endlessness. However, even if you want to say that made in heaven can achieve some kind of transfinite speed, can something transfinite even exist? If so, how can you even represent it other than it being a finite value whose growth is also finite but incomprehensibly immense? I'll get to this soon, but as I said previously, this is a very extensive topic and it can get really complicated, with even my thoughts on it not being fully concrete when we get into the real specifics of infinity. I've laid out why I currently do not believe you can go from what is finite to infinite, and even the possibility of transfinite values via this definition of infinity is contentious. So for now, I'll just leave this section at that and move on. But before moving on, here's some food for thought. If you have contentions with me saying it is impossible to go from that which is finite to that which is infinite via growth without both being inconsistent with what infinity is and describing something that would be akin to approximating infinity or some kind of transfinite value, let's look at it another way. It is stated that Pucci slowed down the rate of accelerated time following the singularity. In other words, he deaccelerated from a supposedly infinite value to a finite one. Think about what that really means and if it is possible. To me, this indicates that there's a distance or gap from what is finite to what is infinite. However, to say this is the case would, again, be to treat infinity as a value as opposed to a state. Merely saying that you somehow decreased or increased the degree of some measurement, in this case the rate at which time is accelerated relative to normal time, from infinite to finite or vice versa, is illogical to me, as it seemingly entails that there is a gap between them that can be overcome, and it treats infinity as an attainable value. Anyways, let's move on. I have another description for infinity. It is similar to the prior, but it treats infinity as an attainable value. It goes like this. Infinity is the state of endlessness, but not something that exists beyond, isolated, and completely unattainable by that which is finite. Rather, it describes a state of endlessness where it is always above that which is finite. Like this, to define something as infinite would be to say it grows without end, and the rate at which it grows is beyond any finite unit achievable. In essence, both definitions are virtually the same, but they differ in a slight but very significant manner. Via the previous definition, infinity would be like space, vast and empty with no end in sight. You can't find an end as there isn't any. There is no such thing as quote-unquote arriving at infinity, since by definition it has no end, limit, or thing you can quote-unquote arrive at. You can only increase in finite magnitude with no limit. The latter definition visualizes infinity on a scale whose end continuously increases at a rate that isn't finite, or maybe at a rate that is finite but beyond any finite value you can imagine, as there may be problems with trying to really assess what the previous description entails. This is basically the same thing as being transfinite. So you can see this section as me tackling the proposed idea of made in heaven attaining transfinite speed, which we are currently defining as infinite. Anyways, like this, made in heaven would be able to accelerate time to infinity and be at that endlessly expanding limit whose degree of expansion is, by definition, impossible to grasp as it is beyond any number you can conceptualize or calculate. Now, even if this is granted, we still run into the issue of elapsed time. Before I even explain it, you have to understand a few things. Firstly, the universe reaches its end, it resets, a new universe is born, and this cycle can be repeated. We can deduce that some time would have to elapse between the universe's birth and transition to a new one. This time is likely finite, as we have both a beginning and an end. And if it was infinite, the transition would never happen due to the previously laid out problems with infinity and measurable extent. With that, we can easily say that the time between the birth of one universe and another happens over finite time. For argument's sake, let's suppose that this time is 1 trillion years. So, within a trillion years, one universe would be born, run its course, die, and another would be born after the death of the previous one. If we use the definition of infinity, where the value is endlessly expanding at a rate that is not finite, or one which is above any conceivable value, then the moment Pucci accelerates time to infinity, he would arrive at the end of the end. What I mean by this is that literally an innumerable amount of cycles would go by instantaneously before Pucci can even think to slow down time acceleration. Think about it. Time is being accelerated at a rate beyond any quantifiable value. This means that it would be above 9 to the power of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 10 and so on and so forth. Meaning that within an instant, literally an incomprehensible amount of galactic years would elapse, meaning that the aforementioned value of 1 trillion years would be over countless times. To put it in other terms, there is a small finite time value for a single cycle. Time is accelerated at a rate that is beyond any conceivable or calculatable value. As the number of cycles increases, the elapsed time also increases but remains finite. If you use a transfinite value to divide a finite one, it follows that you would arrive at an infinitesimal value. Thus, in infinitesimal time, you'd arrive at the end of all cycles if we assume the cycles have an end. If they don't, then in infinitesimal time, you would have elapsed basically a transfinite amount of cycles. To say that Pucci somehow stopped or slowed down this process would be to say he can act in time that is less than infinitesimal. This would, of course, be impossible, as he can only act in the time allowed by his infinite or transfinite accelerated time, which is an infinitesimal time frame. This goes to show how it would be impossible for Pucci to slow down accelerated time once it reaches infinity, or what would be infinite or transfinite accelerated time. Now, there is one way to define infinity that would allow one to say Pucci accelerated time to infinity while also allowing there to be levels of infinity. And that would be to say that infinity means something that continuously increases with no end, or with no foreseeable end. For example, let's say I have 1 liter of water and every 2 seconds it quadruples in amount. Let's also say this increment doesn't ever change. Within the aforementioned hypothetical, you could say I have an infinite amount of water. This definition of infinity is somewhat similar to how it works in set theory and is identical to the way I previously defined it. The only difference is that rather than the rate being endless, it is discernibly finite. This expression of infinity would be more accurately described as never-ending as opposed to infinite. Like this, Pucci's speed would be infinite, but only in the sense that it endlessly increases at a very high rate that possibly also increases. Ultimately, the problem with infinity comes down to magnitude versus growth. What I mean by this is that if you try to say something is infinite in magnitude, you arrive at countless problems when it comes to representing what that actually means and would entail. When you say something is infinite in growth, you resolve almost all the problems that comes with the aforementioned description of infinity. But in doing so, you describe something that is virtually not infinite. When people say something is infinite, they're usually referring to the amount and not growth. But when people say infinite, They also usually mean very great or immensely large, or something that goes on for what appears to be forever, as opposed to something that literally has no limit. Even if it is the latter, whether or not it is actually possible to represent something that has no end or limit is very contentious. Even if the author said Made in Heaven has infinite speed, it may not be what it seems. You see, due to the previously laid out problems with saying it is infinite in magnitude, I am of the belief that when the author said the stand has infinite speed, he is referring to its ability to endlessly increase the rate at which time is accelerated relative to himself. Like the last interpretation of infinity I gave, it would simply mean that there is no upper bound to which his speed can grow, while also remaining finite at any particular moment. While by itself this is a very reasonable explanation, this isn't the only time stand stats are used to reference stuff that is not magnitude. For example, Notorious B.I.G. is said to have infinite speed and range, yet characters with A or less in speed can react to him and they don't all stop time and reacting to the stand. With infinite range, surely it doesn't have to get close to its target to attack it. So what's going on? Why does this stand have infinite stats yet not display them? Well, it is most likely due to the fact that these stats don't reflect magnitudes, if not adaptability and travel range. What I mean is that the infinite speed relates to its ability to adapt to any speed, not it in itself having speed that is infinite. The reason for its infinite range is explained here, as opposed to its capacity of attacking from any distance. Whitesnake has a D in speed, but it was able to keep up with Stone Free, which has a B in speed. According to JoJo Veller, which is basically an art and data book for JoJo, Whitesnake's rating refers to its melt your heart ability and how long it takes to dissolve people. There may be a lot more examples of this, but it goes to show that stand stats don't always reflect the raw physical capabilities of the stand. If not, they may also reflect aspects of how the stand's abilities work. With that being said, do you consider my explanation of how Made in Heaven works to be unreasonable? I think it is the most likely explanation and will directly refute the notion that it has infinite speed. And yeah, that's about it for now. I'd like to reiterate the fact that the discussion surrounding the nature of infinity is very extensive, as it is an issue in philosophy, physics, and mathematics. And in a video about a fictional character, I wasn't going to be able to talk about it as in-depth as I'd like to without making this video like half an hour long and heavily deviating from the topic at hand. So I glossed over it just enough so that you can understand where I'm coming from when I say Pucci doesn't have infinite speed. Anyways, bye.